not here to tell you that you're wrong. I'm not here to try to convert you into my own nutritional dogma. Accepting things on blind faith is stupid. At the very least, I want to kind of poke and prod you and get you to start that dialogue within yourself, point you to do your own research, to do your own self-experimentation. This talk is essentially, if I had to distill it into one theme or one goal, is to get everyone here better at burning body fat. Okay? And I'm sure that no one here is going to find that to be controversial. At the very least, I want people who say are completely on the other end of the dietary faith that I'm on, at least they'll have a better understanding what people on my side of things are doing. At the very least. So I'm not going to go into heavy detail because time. We need questions and answers, I'm sure. We just need to talk about why most people who are alive today are going to benefit from having some type of a relationship with a low-carb, high-fat diet. That's the argument that I'm here to make. For some people, a ketogenic carnivore diet, that is the end goal for them. For other people, depending on your lifestyle, genetics, things of that nature, is not the end goal. But it should be maybe approached as a tool to put in your arsenal of things that you use to optimize your quality of life. This is going to be a compilation of all the things that's really interested me when investigating nutrition and experimentation. Everything from just historical figures that have played a role in this that I find extremely intriguing, to some of the political controversies, this tug of war that has kind of shaped the nutritional guidelines that kind of have seeped into all of the, I guess, at least first world nations, which has had a major impact on health worldwide. And then also, without going too much into science, touching on some of the chemical, molecular processes that are basically the underpinning of your metabolism. So we're going to go over the very definitive therapeutic evidence for a high-fat diet. And then we're also going to go into the more speculative implications it may have for the performance world, your elite athletes, and how it may give them a competitive edge, and how this could be the way of the future. You could be left behind. And that's kind of where it gets more fun. All right, see this fat guy? Excellent looking dude. This is all what we should be aspiring to look like. Anyone heard of William Banting? A little bit of history. William Banting actually wrote the first book on diet. And he didn't come from a medical background. He was actually an undertaker in the mid-1800s in London. He was actually a prestigious, high-status undertaker of his time. His family funeral directing service was actually one out of 4 really high-status undertaker services. The Banting family were the undertakers for the royal house itself. So he was making big bucks, burying kings and dukes and all that stuff. But he was also getting fat. Started in his 30s. Started gaining weight, and it only got worse. This is probably about 1862 before he wrote his book. I don't know why. I guess they weren't into before and after pictures. But this is him pre-Banting diet. What happened is he's making money, he's getting fat, he's getting sick, he's going blind, he's going deaf, he's got an umbilical rupture, he's got boils. He's so fat he can't walk down the stairs if he's not walking down backwards, because it was just so jarring. The weight was just too much for his arthritic joints. He was just falling apart. But he was really involved with his health. He wasn't like your typical fat, lazy person who just accepted their fate and blamed it on this thing or that thing. He was always trying to solve it. He was always going out to the leading medical experts of his time. And again, he had the money to do this, and he was extremely interested in doing this. So he'd go to medical lectures, he had friends who were surgeons, he'd seek their help out, and he would travel far and wide to consult with the leading experts in weight loss medicine of the time. He did all kinds of crazy shit in order to adhere to his doctor's advice, everything from Turkish baths. I've never had a Turkish bath, so if anyone wants to let me know what that's all about later on. But that was all the rage for weight loss at the time. Did that for like a couple of years. Nothing happened. He would take crazy potions of different kinds for years. Didn't really do anything for him. Probably some of the best advice he ever got was one of his friends who's a surgeon and encouraged him to take up some really vigorous exercise. He lived by a river. He had some carpentry skills. He built a huge wooden heavy boat. He would row up and down for about 2 hours every day before going into work. One of my favorite anecdotes from that is he describes like, I got strong as shit. My heart was healthy. I felt very vigorous, but all it did is make me more hungry, which just compelled me to eat more, thus keeping me fat. So there's no denying, like obviously overeating makes you fat. His doctor's like, stop that. Eventually, at the height of his illness and disease and infirmities, he went in for an ear checkup, because remember, he's going deaf. His doctor at the time, or his ear specialist at the time, got back from France. He just attended a lecture where the guy was kind of pontificating about maybe starches and sugars are the dietary route as to why your body would be prompted to create fat. So his doctor just kind of throws it out there. They make a kind of a makeshift meal plan, and it's just vegetables and meat. A little bit of carbs, but he had to cut out everything from potatoes to porridge, bread, beer. They had him cut out butter. I'm not too sure why, but the fat fell off of him. He wasn't exercising. He wasn't doing the baths. He wasn't taking the tinctures. He was just following this diet. The fat melted off. Remember, this is 1860s. 1863 is when he wrote his book. A year later, he's probably about 202 here, 5'5", fat as shit, gross. A year later, he winds up being about 150 pounds. He gets super excited. He writes it all down in an open letter format, and you can all go and get this book for free. It's public domain. It's fascinating. Like, old books are just cool, right? It transports you back in time. He writes about his experiences with all his doctors. He writes about his diet prior to his new diet. And then he writes his diet that his doctor gave him. And then his results. And it just caught on. It went all across Europe to the point where it was published 4 more times. His first edition never got published. He didn't have the credentials, so he just made it himself. He made like 1,000 little pamphlets and just handed them out. And then it caught on. And to this day, Banting is, in some countries like Sweden, is synonymous with just going on a diet. It might not even have anything to do with low carbohydrate, high fat, but it's just synonymous. The word Banting in Sweden, that just means diet. And people are starting to rediscover him today. What I like about him so much is it kind of just solidifies the fact that keto, Atkins, low carb, whatever, is not a fad. And I would argue that this was the first diet. Everything that came after Banting is the true fat diet. Fat people like Banting were kind of an abnormality forever until we had our rise in obesity across the world. It really kind of picked up in the 80s. But before that, I mean, you look at old high school photos or pictures of people in sororities, there might be like one fat person out of like 30 people. It was just understood, like, yes, some people just end up that way, but for the most part, this is just how people are. People are lean. And it was just commonly understood, maybe due to Banting's influence, maybe intuition, but it was just commonly understood, if you wanted to stay lean or get lean, you have to avoid sugars and starches. That was considered fattening back then. So obesity was pretty stable, pretty rare for all of human history. The hormonal model to understand and grapple why this happens was the main model. It was actually kind of before calories in versus calories out, which does have some validity. I'm not one of those people that's like, calories don't matter. They're untrue. This model of obesity was actually being developed in Germany pre-World War II. And this is just how all physicians and doctors at the time understood how fat is gained. Basically what happens is you have a metabolism, which is the summation of all the chemical processes in your body. That's the metabolism. When you eat food, it affects one of the major drivers for your metabolism. We call the way of reading that your glycemic index. Certain things affect the hormone insulin more than others. And for how long insulin is in your bloodstream is the load, so the duration of the insulin spike before you go back to baseline. At any given time, the normal human being who's not eating anything has like a baseline of 5 grams of blood in their bloodstream. It's like 2 little sugar packets of blood at all times, whether or not you're eating or if you've been fasted for a week. you always have a little bit of sugar because you make it yourself. So when you eat food, especially something like carbohydrates that actually have a significant glycemic index as opposed to fat that has like a 0 glycemic index, when you eat food that raises your blood sugar, your body has to excrete insulin from the pancreas to get that under control. Your body's always trying to find homeostasis. And remember, homeostasis is 2 little tiny sugar packets. So the role of insulin is to get your body normalized. Insulin comes out, says, let's get it back to normal. And what happens is, in this hormonal model of obesity that's starting to reemerge, your glucose levels rise, the pancreas creates the insulin, forces it out into the bloodstream, which prompts fat accumulation. It also shuts down your body's ability to burn fat and to use it as fuel. The load, the glycemic load, the duration of the spike, for that whole entire duration, you cannot burn fat and you can only store it. It also drives hunger. It affects your brain in a particular way. The mechanical level, you take in a bunch of calories, right? Your energy to do the things you like to do. It also drives hunger because your body is busy storing it away into little prisons called fat cells. So now you can't even use the energy. It causes hunger due to a lack of energy, and it affects the part of your brain that they call the appestat. It regulates your appetite. It tells you when you've had an adequate, perfect amount of food, and says you can stop being hungry now, and then it releases its other hormones that control hunger. And what they theorized was that obesity is more than just this mechanical thermodynamic calories in versus calories out. It's somewhat of a brain disorder, as well as a kind of an abuse of your hormones. And this was kind of the dominant model for a while, being developed in Germany. Then World War II happened. Germany gets kicked out of the global science community, as well as all the other things. Everyone's like, fuck Germany, right? And the physicians who were developing this model and studying insulin and studying obesity and making a lot of gains in that area of science, they were just all lost with World War II. So, what replaces it? People who were more on the side of the calories in versus calories out rationale for why we gain or lose fat. This guy is Ansel Keys. Anyone heard of Ansel Keys? Ansel Keys was an American pathologist. He was the one who hypothesized during the 1950s coronary heart failure, everyone's stroking out crisis, that it's saturated fat that is causing heart failure. And it was called the diet heart hypothesis. And there's tons of info out there about him. He had this uncanny way of persuading people of things. I mean, even his friends called him aggressive. He had very sharp elbows. He was able to get his theory, which was, now we know, is founded on very weak science. Very, very, very weak science. And we can go into that later. But basically, it's all been debunked. It was just horseshit science. It was like, I wake up every day and the sun's out, so therefore, because I wake up, the sun rises. It was like that shitty. Just correlation studies, associative studies, very weak. You can make any association you want. You just cherry pick your data points, put them on a chart, boom. Saturated fat causes heart disease. We get this whole concept of like our arteries being like plumbing that's getting clogged up with gunk. And that's just not the way it works out. It's just not true. But anyway, so he fought his way to the top. Eventually, he's able to get in front of the right audience. He taps this nerve in the public health community, in the science community, the nutrition community, and he inserts the dietary heart hypothesis, which is the reason why we all grew up with moms buying fat-free, low-fat, high-carbohydrate crap. I grew up on peanut butter and jelly sandwiches, Capri Suns, Nutter Butter bars. We ate what poor people ate. And lucky for us, it was heart healthy, heart healthy Cheerios and all that stuff. Okay, but if you go back far enough and dig around, you're going to find Ansel Keys at the very head of this scare. And that created what a lot of us refer to as lipophobia, which is the fear of fat. It also was the reason why we got the food pyramid, with the base of like 1 million servings of bread. That's so important. Then you get vegetables and fruits, and then you get like fish and meat and some fat and oils, and then like ice cream at the top, because like a little bit's okay. He's the guy who's responsible for this. The USDA adopted it in 1977, and then you get a very calorie-conscious population, a population that is totally afraid of fat, and it was the single most important commercial driver for nutrition advice, the agriculture industry. It actually turns out he was being funded by Coca-Cola and other people in the sugar industry or whatnot. And so we get a very calorie-conscious population. So most people shift their attention to the energy imbalance model of obesity is, you're fat and it's all your fault because you eat too much, you pathetic piece of shit. Well, I'm a personal trainer and I specialize in getting people lean and healthy. And I work with a lot of people who are overweight and obese. And some of these people are fantastic at adhering to these very calorie restrictive diets, very balanced macros. I don't throw keto at them at all. I don't even talk about it. You give them a nice like 40-30-30 split, whatever, and we manipulate things. And some of these people just cannot lose weight whatsoever. So I would spin my wheels for years teaching this concept. It's so simple. You have to maintain a caloric deficit. It's just math. Weight loss is all a numbers game, right? Right? I mean, it's thermodynamics. You can throw that word at them. You know, it's just physics, right? Well, our body doesn't burn calories the way that the, like a calorie barometer, the engineer back in the 1920s, he started putting fats and carbs and proteins in this machine and burning it and measuring the amount of calories. And that was such a novel idea. It was ingenious. And people were like, yeah, so this has this many calories, that has that many calories. Genius. But that's just not the way the body works. However, this is still the predominant model. Energy in, energy out. You expend energy through your basic metabolic functions, breathing, pumping blood, moving around, exercise, all that stuff. And then whatever you didn't burn off, you're gonna convert that as fat. And that's it. So just don't overeat, right? This fear of saturated fat, and remember, calories in versus calories out, fat's especially bad, not only because it's gonna cause heart disease, but it's twice as many calories as every other food. So like more of a reason to avoid it, because you only get this much, but you get this huge calorie load. So I mean, of course it's terrible. And with that, you get all the polyunsaturated fats, these manufactured industrial quality fats like vegetable oils, seed oils, all that are now being linked to all kinds of diseases. I mean, they're just incredibly toxic. We're not supposed to be cooking in soybean oil or canola oil or grapeseed oil. It's absolutely awful. And so we have to get away from this. Fun fact about canola oil, does anyone know what canola oil is made from?
Rapeseed.
Rapeseed. So don't cook in rape oil. Don't do that. It's bad. It's weird. For 2.5 million years roughly, as we've been evolving into the species we are today, we've been eating that. A little bit of that, but mostly this. And the fat that's within that. We've been eating meat off the bone. We've been eating organ meats. We started fermenting vegetables quite early too. That's something you can find in the cuisine of every culture around the world. So right here, we've been here for about 2.5 million years. The rest of the stuff, about 12,000 years. Completely relying on animals to sustain them. You could live an entire year, each one of us could live on a cow. Just eating every part of it, you will never have a micronutrient deficiency, a macronutrient deficiency, definitely not a protein deficiency, and you would be fine. Because that's what we are genetically hardwired to thrive at. And you'd be totally shredded the whole time. So right here, about 12,000 years, and that's like in the Fertile Crescent, like what became like ancient Persia, okay? And then it slowly made its spread across the world. My Northern European ancestors, some of them didn't start growing crops until like 2,000 years ago. So that's even less time. Then you have the Native Americans, the Inuit, the Aborigines. They never started growing crops, some of those people. Some tribes did, but a lot of them didn't. They lived literally off of the fat of the land. So we've been genetically hardwiring the majority of our time to thrive on animal proteins, animal fats, organ meats, maybe some fermented vegetables or wild raw greens. But the biggest payload of calories that would keep your tribe alive were the big animals. Digging up little tiny shitty burdock root that's really the only tuber at the time, super bitter and not fun to dig up with a stick was just not practical. We were nomadic, we followed the meat. Given this understanding, I want to highlight some of the dietary consensus guidelines that you can go look up today. If you Google national or even global dietary guidelines, you're going to be given all kinds of guidelines to live by and eat by. And most of them are still just founded on these associative studies, these epidemiological studies, that is like the most weak kind of science. Most of them are not based on definitive actual scientific fact. They're not based on actual clinical trials, meta-analysis, none of that good quality science. The first dietary consensus guideline, and we're going to go over just three, okay? The three worst ones that I think are most beneficial for you to just think about. Dietary animal fat causes heart disease. Hopefully no one still believes this in here, but yeah, out there in their world, that this is actually still a thing for them. And I think it's holding a lot of people back, and it's holding them back from losing the fat that they need to lose. But just like I'm saying, there's actually no definitive evidence that saturated fat causes heart disease. And actually, in the good quality sciences that are out there, we're actually finding more links to sugars and starches and spiking your insulin chronically as being the actual cause. All the inflammation that you're causing in your body by constantly pounding the Gatorades and the Coke and the Cliff Bars and the energy supplements that are all based on sugars. There's actually much stronger evidence that this is the cause. And this is all back from Ansel Keys, lipophobia, funded by the sugar industries, the agriculture industries, the corporate lobbyists, scientists with a huge conflict of interest. I mean, our nutrition policy was just so severely obstructed for the last half century, and people are still, all you have to do is go to Walmart and hang out, okay, and you'll see them. I mean, people are so sick and diseased and unnecessarily fat, and just like Banting, most of his diseases, like his blindness, his deafness, his boils, his umbilical rupture, he couldn't fucking put a shoe on without a shoehorn. All these things went away once he lost the weight. So many of these diseases are all linked to the same thing, the diabetes, the obesity, the heart failure. And if you don't believe me, all of the critiques of these weak studies linking saturated fat to heart disease has been compiled into this really, really cool book called The Big Fat Surprise by Nina Teicholz. Came out in 2014. People are still talking about it. And what she does is amazing. She has more patience than I can imagine. She takes every single significant study that's ever been linked to saturated fat causing heart disease and just meticulously rips it a new asshole, just like one after another, after another, after another. And it's amazing. She's brilliant. If you want to understand more of the fraudulent science, and look, you're going to learn a lot about just how to actually do good research. Like, most people don't really know how to conduct science, But science is about disbelief and disproof and skepticism. It's not about consensus. Consensus means everyone just agrees. Like, we all just agree that Matt's an asshole. Right? And that has nothing to do with truth. That's not science. And we're telling people what to do with the shit they're putting in their bodies based on consensus, and that's anti-science. So if you see anything that's a consensus guideline, run away. Turn the other way. Okay? There's a lot of good science out there being done that demands your attention. And this group of people here, especially, we should all be operating on that higher level of really finding good quality information, if not just this group of people. Guideline number 2, carbs are an essential macronutrient in the modern diet and should make up at least 60% of the daily intake of all humans at all ages. 60%? What's your macro split right now, Matt? Not much. Yeah. Good. He's fasting.
Normally I'll more like about 40.
40? Okay. It's better than 60. Damn sure. The medical community has never identified any sort of actual medical disease for carbohydrate deficiency, and I'm sure this is all common knowledge. This should be review for you guys. when you go to this page to verify for itself, you're going to wonder, why is a so-called balanced diet being based on a nutrient we actually have no need for? Why are we telling people it's necessary if there's no need for it? When you reproduce and make kids, or when your DNA just replicates itself to make a new cell to replace the old cell that's dying, when your DNA unzips itself, it needs essential fatty acids and essential amino acids. That's it. Fat and protein. That's the basis of your DNA. And you can go your whole life without eating them. We do not need them for an active, healthy, powerful, ripped and jacked life, if that's what you want to have. The fact is, though, is that we seek out sugar when fat's not available. Okay? And if you're very adapted to eating carbohydrates and sugars, well, you're only going to just be more compelled to do that, thus continually influencing your brain chemistry as well, which just drives you to keep seeking out the sugars and the starches and the fructose and all the carbohydrates. So we eat sugar, our desire for fat actually goes down, it jams the aquistat, and again, remember, it locks our calories that we could be using for exercise and tantric sex and all the cool shit, and locks it away into fat cells. And this insulin, being the driver of obesity, is taught in medical schools. You can grab the dominant medical text that most of your doctors and nurses have to study, and you will find an entire chapter about how insulin is the driver for obesity. But they don't emphasize this, and sometimes they skip it over. And then 4 years later, when they're out in the field, they meet the cardiologist, and it's all over. It's lost. It's all calories in, calories out. It's all, oh, you're just genetically fucked up and fat. I like arguing with vegans, especially, because they know, like, I almost exclusively live on protein and fat. And they say, well, what about those gorillas and chimpanzees and like those horses and rhinoceroses and elephants? They're all so jacked and like huge and got so much muscle, and like all they do is eat plant-based things, essentially carbohydrates, you know, like just vegetable fibers and plant matter and just like carbs, right? Maybe we should be like that. The best thing you can remind a vegan, or maybe educate them on, is our primate ancestors, very similar to our genetic cousins like gorilla, chimpanzee, orangutan, gibbons, bonobos, and even other big-ass animals like horses, elephants, rhinos. They have what's called a hindgut, and which it's like a huge colon that ferments and breaks down vegetable matter at like a Holocaust-level event of carbs, okay? They can take it all in, and they know what to do with it. These animals don't get heart disease like humans do, yet they live on saturated fat, because these hindgut fermenters, they take the vegetable plant matter, fibers, and their digestive system converts it into saturated fat, a kind of saturated fat called phytanic acid. They survive on saturated fat. We come from ancient primate ancestors, just like their cousins who are alive today. We come from people who live on saturated fat. They're not getting heart disease from saturated fat. We're not going to get heart disease from eating saturated fat. It just doesn't make sense. And as the science keeps rolling out, more and more people are going to wake up to this. And again, we have to remember that a very, very low carb diet, at some point, zero carb, think about the ice ages. The only thing people are eating for millions of years, the vast majority of our existence, has been animal fats and proteins, like the bulk of your daily nutrition. Something that I find extremely compelling, our northern European ancestors, so people of like North England, Scotland, all of Scandinavia especially, it's just been confirmed this year by very apologetic, liberal, diversity-driven scientists, very meekly gets out on a podium and basically says Northern Europeans are a special genetic group that is more at risk for things like type 2 diabetes, all the things that stem from insulin resistance. And I'm not too bummed out about that. You might be. About 75% of Caucasians just genetically should stay away from carbs as much as possible for optimizing their DNA. We are more at risk for developing the diseases that stem from chronic exposure to sugar. Now there's like a small subset of lucky Caucasians, like your Eastern Europeans, your Serbians and Croatians, that actually have a much higher tolerance for carbohydrates. You know, you look at someone, say from Pakistan, they can probably do just fine and won't develop any sort of pre-diabetic symptoms on 150, 200 grams of carbs a day. It's just genetics. Insulin resistance, which is the last consensus guideline, is sort of the genetic precursor for how well you're going to be able to handle carbs, or how carbohydrate intolerant you are, and that's largely out of your control. Fun fact, we got the genetic haplotype of being kind of weak about carbs from Neanderthals. That's something that's very unique to Northern Europeans. We cross-populated with Neanderthals. It's a fancy word for fucking with Neanderthals. Most of the offspring of that moved into northwestern Europe and populated that, which is where the highest concentration of this genetic haplotype is. And then the rest of them traveled east and eventually populated what is now like the Inuit regions. Native Americans are extremely intolerant. We wiped out entire tribes, not by guns, germs, and steel, but by introducing them to sugar and flour after we wiped out all of their food sources. You know, like the Plains Indians, completely decimated. We killed all the buffalo and then started trading in sugar and flour. You look at the Aboriginals, they're a case study for out-of-control diabetes. Same thing happens. Whitey shows up with his flour and sugar. All of a sudden, they're all fat as shit. I mean, it's just disgusting. Completely carb-intolerant people. And it's genetics. Even the Huns, who finally, you know, completely gave it to the Romans, they called the Romans the bread eaters. And they noticed the Romans couldn't last as long in battle. These guys were essentially keto. They were very stealthy. They would put slabs of meat underneath their saddles and ride around on it all day long to soften and tenderize the meat so they could eat it without having to start a fire and give their position up. They were like the innovators of like ketotic sports nutrition. They would make these billiard ball sized balls of animal fat, and mixed up with it would be ground coffee beans that they got by like trading with the Assyrians and stuff. They got other things from the Assyrians like chariots, but they also got coffee and these like keto energy balls, and they would eat that, and they would talk about how they could last for days on just that. And if they got especially fatigued, the ultimate sports drink of all, they would puncture an artery in their horse and drink its blood and then sew it back up. Fat, protein, electrolytes, salt in the blood. I think the Maasai people still do that today. And then the last consensus guideline that we need to get over and stop believing is the condition of insulin resistance is uncommon, and basically it's just not important to the dominant medical community. You can go to the nutritionary or the dietary nutrition guidelines right now and just search for insulin resistance. I did this yesterday just to make sure it was still this way. You'll get the page that's like, sorry, nothing to, we don't have anything on that. It's not important. But the thing is, people who don't live in like nutrition land like I do, they don't carry around like basic knowledge of these metabolic disorders. So just real quick, insulin resistance is largely genetic. You can develop it too. It's largely genetic. And basically what it means is when you eat food, your body has to produce a lot of insulin because your body's so resistant to it in order to get your blood sugar levels back to baseline. Okay? So most people who are insulin resistant are overweight, and they're going to develop a fatty liver, which then develops into type 2 diabetes. Not everyone who's insulin resistant is overweight. I'm extremely insulin resistant, and I'm not overweight. Most of my family members are overweight. And then you got insulin sensitive people. They eat something that's full of sugar and carbohydrates. They just need a tiny little drop. It can take that Snickers bar payload of carbs back to baseline in no time. Barely any insulin. Most people are insulin sensitive. They're skinny, right? I'm sure everyone here knows somebody who can eat whatever they want, whenever they want, like shit, and they never gain any fat. And you're like, what's going on? I thought it was like calories in, calories out. How can they possibly be like ripped like a bodybuilder all the time? it's probably something to do with how well their body responds to insulin. So remember, resistant means you need a lot of insulin. Sensitive means you only need a little bit. So for like in weightlifting or training terminology, I would be intensity sensitive. As long as I lift heavy a few times a week, my strength is so stable and consistent. But I'm volume resistant, meaning I need a lot of volume. If I want to like bulk up and build up, I need to do tons and tons and tons of volume. And then Todd over there, my buddy, he can look at a weight and just get jacked. So he's very volume sensitive. He can do a few sets, done. Veins everywhere, just look. I mean, and this guy's a complete carnivore. He looks like he's totally carb loaded all the time. Just look at his biceps.
Todd, take him to the coach.
Yeah. A lot of people are insulin resistant. Why this is so important that the medical community realize that insulin resistance is a major, major deal is because this is the precursor, predominantly genetic situation that leads to the most severe diseases of our time, and more things like cancers, Alzheimer's, dementia, chronic depression. It's all slowly being linked with very, very, very strong, compelling evidence. This is the root thing here, insulin resistance. And you can go your whole life being insulin resistant and it not manifest into any of this. But the complete lack of knowledge of what this even is and what it can lead to is why it's so important to learn about this. About 2/3 of the world population is diabetic. Did you know that? 2/3. And these are just like the diagnosed people. Some people think like 1 out of 2 people who are diabetic are totally undiagnosed. I mean, just in America alone, you got like 80 million people who are just like confirmed as pre-diabetics. And again, this is just the people who are confirmed and diagnosed. In just a few years, 40% of the American population will be confirmed diabetic before they die. And you can say, yeah, fuck their world, fuck them, more for us. Let's just build a new world on the ashes of this one. And I totally agree with you. But people, like, if you think about someone who could survive an apocalyptic event, who are the people that are going to be alive a year later after society collapses, right? They're going to have a lot of similar characteristics and qualities. Obviously, people who are comfortable with violence, people who have good communication and tribal networks, right? But there are also going to be people who are very adaptive and people who are not reliant on exogenous forms of energy. People who can go, like our ancestors did, for extended periods of time without eating food. It wasn't like our ancestors 20,000 years ago when they were still nomadic and digging holes to live in for a day, fucking their sister constantly. It wasn't like they just skipped lunch. They skipped last week, like all the time. And if it wasn't for this very eloquent metabolic system to use fat as very high octane performance fuel to like take down violent tribesmen in your own tribe or a neighboring tribe full of assholes or a mammoth, saber-toothed tiger. They went through a cycle of feast and famine, and that's so normal for our ancient ancestors. And it's what made us fucking tough. Like, stress makes you strong, right? We evolved in the most harsh, unimaginably brutal climate and environment of feast and famine and violence. You look at the bones of ancient people dug up. Most of them died from blunt trauma, just cracked skulls all day long. They didn't eat all the time. And if it wasn't for the ability to burn fat, we wouldn't be here today. And so for anyone who's going to tell you a high-fat diet is dangerous or fasting is dangerous or it's going to make you weak or it's going to make all your muscles fall off or whatever, they don't know what they're talking about. And they haven't studied their ancestors. And I think for a group of people who find it so valuable to honor their ancestry and reclaim the old ways and all of that stuff, we should do it with nutrition too. You shouldn't just stop at tattooing a rune on your face. Take a little bit deeper. Think about what your ancestors lived through. They passed these genes on to you, and now you're just going to poison them with bullshit, things that no human was made to eat. And then you're corrupting your DNA, you have kids, and now you're putting that out into the world. Sorry, I went on a little tirade. This is what you're supposed to not let me do. So how to check if you're insulin resistant? Real quick, the best way is height to waist ratio. So you take your height in feet and inches, so I'm 6 foot, and then you take your waist measurement, usually for guys it's like right underneath the belly button, for women that's like an inch above the belly button. In a relaxed state, measure your waist, and then divide your height by inches of your waist. And if you're above a 0.5 or higher, you're probably insulin resistant. Other things like skin tags. Anyone have like little skin tags, like weird little bits of skin that just like hang off? Like sometimes they get them like in the armpit. Some people are covered in them. That's actually been linked to insulin resistance as well. The waist to height ratio is a good quick way to just tell. Or you could just look at a guy and be like, yeah, that guy's huge. Like he has to get 2 airplane tickets. He's insulin resistant. So insulin resistance, just real quick, we already know why it's so important, but if you are already genetically predisposed, you can make it bad by eating bad carbs. You produce insulin. The cells resist it because you suck at using insulin, especially if you're genetically predisposed. The sugar gets stored as fat. It also shuts down your ability to burn fat. And you feel tired and hungry. It messes up your ability to recognize whether or not you've even put calories in. So it just compels you to eat more. And you get trapped in this cycle. And chronic exposure to this is what will take an insulin-resistant person who's healthy and turn them diabetic or overweight or develop into metabolic syndrome and all the other things. Diseases that have been confirmed as a direct consequence of insulin resistance: arterial inflammation, metabolic syndrome, coronary heart disease, stroke, obesity, diabetes, and hypertension. And underneath this dotted line are the things that they are now really starting to dive into, and it's fascinating. 2/3 of your brain is made of omega-3 fatty acids. And when you're eating a diet that's predominantly based on carbohydrates, or just like the standard American diet, or SAD for short, you're not going to get enough omega-3s. Vegans have a real hard time with this. They say, oh, I get it from flaxseed, it's got ALA in it. Well, guess what? Your body, yes, it can turn ALA into omega-3, but it's a very ass-backwards alchemical process that's still not even really understood, but what they find is that it yields barely anything. And that's just one of the micronutrient deficiencies vegans have. Doctors at the cutting edge of Alzheimer's research, you know what they call Alzheimer's now? It's kind of a joke, but it's because they found so much good evidence. They're starting to call Alzheimer's type 3 diabetes. But the great thing is that all these diseases come from one cause, and there's one way to heal it, which is just restricting carbohydrates if you're that type of person. It's that simple. So it's crazy, but there's some good news to that. This is a graph of a lot of wonderful clinical studies that were done by Dr. Atkins' students. So this is all the stuff that Dr. Atkins wanted to prove, but he just didn't have the means of proving it, and he died. But his students went on and carried on his legacy. By the way, Dr. Atkins didn't die from his diet. He died because he fucking slipped and fell in his head and died of like a brain trauma, basically. So every single coronary risk factor that your doctor's going to look at, like when they do your blood work and all that stuff, be like, oh yeah, you're totally going to have a heart attack in like 6 months. They'll look at all of these, okay? So the dark line is the high carb diet, and the lighter line is the low carb, high fat diet. Every single risk factor that they look at to determine whether you're at risk improves on a high fat, high saturated fat, low carbohydrate diet, and they all get worse or barely improve on a high carbohydrate, low fat diet. What I find most important is like your triglyceride levels. I mean, look how much more they go down on your high fat diet. And it's like, what? Your triglyceride levels go down on a high fat diet? Just completely debunking this bullshit we've been fed since we can remember. Another thing I really like is your cholesterol. So your good cholesterol that you need, HDL, you need it to produce hormones. Testosterone, you need it to build the walls of your cells. It's so important. It increases, so you get more of the building blocks of very important things. And then your bad cholesterol goes way down, your LDL goes way down. And what happens on the high carbohydrate diet? It actually increases. One cause, one treatment for so many of these diseases. Keto food pyramid. So again, just for educational purposes, I don't care if you become keto, I just want you to be better at burning fat and more informed. So what is keto? I think everyone in here could be like, it's where you don't fucking eat carbs, right? Bacon, that's it, that's keto. But what really is ketosis? It's when your body produces ketones, which is a byproduct of fat metabolism. It's produced in the liver, and those replace blood sugar that's going to your brain. And we found a lot of very beneficial mechanistic properties of ketones in your brain chemistry. Also what happens is, well, because of this major lack of blood, liver glucose depletes, glycogen levels go down, now we're resorting to burning fat. It's basically a state at which you force your body to burn fat. It has no choice. And there's an adaptation period. Keto is when you're fueling yourself by fat or the byproducts of it. Now, here's the 3 rules if anyone wants to experiment with low-carb nutrition, and then I'll tell you why everyone should experiment with it a little bit. Here's the 3 rules. Do not jump into a keto diet, just cold turkey. Don't do that. That's the best way to hate keto. It's the best way to burn out, hit the keto flu after a week or 2 weeks, get really tired, your strength goes down in the gym. Best way to hate keto is jumping into it. My rule is spend about 3 weeks just eating a moderate carbohydrate diet, maybe 150 grams. If you're more insulin resistant, maybe 100 grams. Cut out all vegetable and seed oils, like paleo, like your traditional paleo diet. Just eat paleo for about 3 weeks. And now you're actually getting your body better at burning fat because you're not feeding it enough of a glycolytic load to shut off all fat burning. Now you're able to start burning a little bit more fat. Okay? And now you're ready to actually jump into it when you're ready. You've gotten rid of all the super toxic stuff. The carbs you're eating are healthy carbs. And now you're good to go. That's rule number 1. Rule number 2, when you're doing this reset type of diet or when you're actually going keto, do not let yourself go hungry, ever. Do not try to maintain a caloric deficit just yet. It's not time. Okay? Always feel satisfied. And then rule number 3 is don't ever eat anything you don't find to be absolutely delicious. And I think that's one of the most important things. No matter what kind of diet you're eating. Don't eat shit you don't like eating. It's that simple. You want to ruin your diet, you want to ruin your game plan, your macro split, you want to piss off your personal trainer, you want to look like garbage, well, start eating things that make you really sad and bored. And then you'll go for the Ben & Jerry's and the frozen pizzas and all that stuff, okay? So life's too short to eat shitty, tasteless food. So why go keto? Well, I think we've already been over that. Evolution, genetics, you have North European ancestry, honor your ancestry, you want to lose fat more efficiently. But I would say mostly because insulin resistance. That's why. And not even necessarily keto. But some people are so insulin resistant that, and studies show this too, I'm not pulling this out of my ass, some people cannot lose fat no matter how much you restrict their calories because they are so sensitive to that hormone. You have to get their carbs to like 10 a day. It's not a lot of carbs, and as soon as they find that perfect set point, the weight falls off. And for some of these people, they have to just stay there their whole life. In the moment they rise up, fat gain all over again. Other people, like we already talked about, low carb for them should be like 100, 150, okay? And that's where they can live. It's extremely anti-inflammatory. So many of the diseases that we've talked about stem from systemic chronic inflammation, brain disorders, heart disease, cancers, right? Cancer cells have got to have glucose. They have to have sugar to live. That's their fuel source. And when you cut the carbs out, you're starving cancer cells. Major cognitive improvements. This is mainly just because of the nature of the ketones on the brain, okay? And then also the way that sugars hamper the brain's ability to make decisions and, you know, your appetite center of your brain as well. It also fights off neurodegenerative diseases. And I think that's pretty common knowledge. And it'll make you recover from AIDS. No, I'm just kidding. Nothing does that. But it does aid in your recovery. See what I did there? There's a lot of recovery benefits, and that's mostly due to bringing inflammation down, all right? But here's the cool part, all right? Keto is not the end goal for, I think, most people. Some people, they go carnivore, sold, they continue gaining strength. It's like they're made for it, okay? And they just live ripped and jacked all year long, and all they do is eat steak. And that's awesome. But most people just need to develop a relationship where they do periods of low carb lifestyle, at least in order to get all of the adaptive benefits of going through what we call keto adaptation. So your body, most people are completely adapted to being reliant on some significant portion of carbohydrates, whether it's 20% of their diet or 60% of their diet or whatever it may be. But if it's that significant of your diet, your body is, well, you're probably eating more than most people who are low or high fat. Okay, I haven't eaten today. I'm not hungry. I'm not going to get hungry until I'm cooking my steak at like 8 o'clock and I can smell it cooking. Okay, I don't have hunger because I'm always burning fat. But people who rely on carbohydrates, who are adapted to burning carbohydrates, are constantly having to re-up and re-up and re-up. And why? Because they suck at burning fat. They don't have the metabolic machinery in order to burn fat quick enough. And what do I mean by burning fat? What I mean is your cells take either sugars or carbs and they make it into ATP, which is your body's energy currency. If you take creatine, you should know what ATP is. Creatine is a building block for ATP, right? When you go through the fat adaptation cycle, something really cool happens. And there's a lot of things that happen, like the enzymatic environment in your body changes so that you can better metabolize fats. But one of the really cool things is, when I say metabolic machinery, I mean the enzymes, but this is the cool part. Your body doubles the amount of muscle and brain mitochondria. And everyone knows what mitochondria is, right? It's the little organelle in your cell that is responsible for creating ATP, energy. That's why you take creatine, right? To give your body all the building blocks it needs so that you have more cellular energy to make muscle contractions and work out harder and then get stronger, and then the cycle repeats itself. If you have more mitochondria via mitochondrial biogenesis, which is stimulated by a low carb, high fat diet, you're going to double the amount of energy producers you have in every cell in your body. And if you stick with it for long enough, within a year, and this is what makes it really hard to sell, but within a year, if you can swallow your pride and maybe not be able to lift as much as you used to be able to, or maybe not be able to outrun your competition as fast, within a year you can have a completely rebuilt metabolic machine. You can burn and oxidize fat and turn it into that high octane fuel much more efficiently and much quicker than anyone else. Let's get into athletics really quick and then we'll be done. The athletes who have become keto adapted, they have twice as many mitochondria, they have twice as many powerhouses in their brain and in their muscle cells. What do you think is happening in these elite endurance events when the keto adapted athletes who've spent a year suffering and getting adapted, what's happening? They're breaking records. And it's starting in the ultra marathon, 100-mile runs, 100 fucking miles. Can you imagine the toll it takes on your body? Sometimes these people don't recover for months after 100 miles. The world record has been beaten more than once by a keto adapted athlete. No sugar gel packets, no Gatorades, no energy bars, no carbs. Now it's seeping into the regular marathon world. It's seeping into the Ironman world. One of the most decorated athletes in the Ironman world, she's won 28 Ironmans being a low-carb athlete. Okay, so anyone who wants to tell you that, oh, low carb is bad for performance, you need carbs to perform, yes, they are right if you're carb adapted. But if you get fat adapted, you don't bonk out when they do. So the old theory is carb up, store all these carbs, so you can hold about 600 to 1,000 calories worth of glycogen throughout your liver and your muscles, just depending on how much mass you have. When a highly glycolytic sport, you're going to burn through like pretty much all of those within like the first 20 to 60 minutes. Now you're scraping at the barrel, and then you got to get those gels and those drinks, and you're constantly relying on exogenous forms of energy. Okay, and that's great if they're available. It's not great post-apocalyptic, right? It's not great if you're a stone age person, and it's not great when you're on a 100-mile run out in the middle of nowhere, and it's not great if you don't want to poison your body with that shit. So what happens? You got a sugar adapted athlete and a fat adapted athlete. Both of them can carb up. We can all carb up. You know, we can use it as a workout supplement, sure. It's not like your muscles stop being able, like they lose their ability to store glycogen, right? You never lose that. So both of these athletes can carb up and fill up their stores, 600, let's say 600 calories of energy. And then the gun goes off and they're racing. Most endurance athletes, you call it bonking out, right? So you bonk out, right? And the old theory is like, well, you just burn through all your muscle glycogen, and now your muscle can't make contractions because you don't have the energy building block to make ATP. But now we know that your body's always trying to keep you alive, and it's called the central governor theory. And it's basically your brain is like, all right, you only have 150 grams left of carbohydrate. It's in your liver. Your muscle is spent. It's completely empty. We're not going to let you get any lower than that. We're going to keep you alive in that fight or flight situation just through millions of years of having, giant cats jump on us. You never know. Okay, backup fuel. You need to pull over and take a nap, right? Bonking out. Can't go any further. We used to think it was a muscle thing. It's a mental thing, right? You're tired in the gym. You know it's a mental thing, but you want to say, oh, I've just depleted my glycogen. I'm going to carb up, right? And sometimes that works. What does the fat-burning athlete do? They deplete glycogen, and their brain is like, cool, that's empty. Good thing I'm metabolically flexible, and now I can start making ketones like a boss. And then boom, this guy's bonked out. This guy finishes the 100-mile race. Or this guy has to take a break from lifting weights, and this guy's still keyed into the zone. Mental focus is sharp. He can still maintain power and speed and can finish his set of deadlifts or whatever it is. Metabolic flexibility, people. And you can all have that. You can all have metabolic flexibility if you get fat adapted. And again, here's the typical conversation. Here's a conversation I have with Paul. He says, this is Paul when I first met him. This is Moot 2004. He's going through a hard time, very insulin resistant, as you can tell. No, that's the dude from Carpathian Forest. Anyways, have a conversation with Paul. And Paul, I'm sorry, I gotta pick on you because you're the shit and you can take it, okay? Typical conversation, and I knew how it was gonna go, and it doesn't really go anywhere. Hey man, I see you're doing a keto thing, and I don't really talk about what I'm doing a lot. But every now and then I post on social media, hey, I still don't eat carbs that much. Sometimes I go on an Oreo binge or whatever. But for the most part, no carbs. And people like Paul, same day, other people too. But Paul, he hits me up and he's like, hey man, do you think I could experiment with that in a productive way? I got all this BJJ conditioning to do. I'm also trying to keep my strength up and all this stuff. What do you think about going keto? And I was like, yeah, obviously it's good for you, but yeah, you're going to see a huge dip in your performance. Humongous dip. Because you have to get adapted. And like we said, it takes a full year to develop that new metabolism. You get about 80% of the benefits after the first 6 weeks, which is awesome, but it takes the rest of the year to get about 20%. And I didn't tell Paul this, I was just like, yeah, your strength is going to shit the bed, and you're going to have to spend some time adapting, and then it's going to be awesome. I'm sure he was really busy. No response. This is the typical conversation. I'm saying, yeah, it's going to suck. You got to adapt. You got to work for it. Your deadlift PR, just forget about it. Your 1 mile run time, forget about it for a while. And then that's where they want to stop talking. And I get it, man. It's hard to tell, even an elite athlete whose knowledge of nutrition is so much better, and they have a much more sense of delayed gratification and discipline. And they don't want to hear that. Hey man, you're going to have to put this competition on the side or whatnot. It's too long, and we live in that culture of instant gratification. So the low carb, high fat spectrum, you got really fat people, really unhealthy people who need to use it as a therapy, who might need to stay on it for their entire lives. And then you have elite athletes who, as we've talked about through developing that new metabolic machinery, mainly through mitochondrial biogenesis, can use it as a way to get the edge, okay? Getting the edge is not loading up on carbs. Everyone loads up on carbs. It's nothing special. It doesn't make you special. Getting the edge is becoming fat adapted, loading up on carbs like your competition does, who's a sugar burner, and then outlasting them when they bonk out because you're a fat burning beast. This is the spectrum. And most of us are in between. Okay, and it's okay, well, what do I do? Because the athletes are doing targeted carb loads, or carbohydrate cycling, and that's really tricky and easy to fuck up. I've been there, I've screwed it up so many times, I've fallen on my face more times than I can count. But most of us are in the middle. But that doesn't mean some of us should just do it long term, forever. But it also doesn't mean you should just demonize carbohydrates. Again, it's a fantastic workout supplement. Okay, it's a good high-octane fuel for that really glycolytic part of your workout. But it should not be something that you sustain your very existence upon. That's when you get diseased, especially white folks. Okay, I like these two guys. They're jacked. They're both super keto, totally keto. I like Dom a lot more. He's super nerdy. He's been on quite a few podcasts. If you listen to the Oprah Winfrey podcast, the Joe Rogan podcast, you've seen him on there. He knows a ton of stuff. I just want to post these guys. They're jacked. Like, anyone here would be a total liar to say, like, oh, those guys don't look fantastic. They have a lot of muscle mass. They're strong. Okay, they're both fat adapted, and they both strategically use carbohydrates if necessary. But they're very, very disciplined. Dom over here will actually he'll just do crazy shit, like he'll fast for a week, completely fasted, and then when like people like naysayers or scientists roll up at his gym, he'll come out 7-day fasted, and he'll pull like 500 pounds for 10 reps in a row, no problem, won't break a sweat, won't need to like keel over and like breathe heavy or anything. And this really speaks to what a powerful fuel source we're always carrying around in us. You're never gonna run out of fat. Sorry to tell you, but you're not. Even someone who's like 3% body fat still has like 20,000 calories on their body to use, okay? Carbohydrates, it just depends on your body mass. Chantel, right?
Yeah.
She might store 400 calories worth of carbs with the amount of body mass that's on. And then Matthias, he could probably store somewhere like 800-900 calories worth of carbohydrate, okay? But that shit runs out real quick. So if you want the edge, get fat adapted, get good at getting fat adapted, especially if you want to use carbs for the benefit they can give you. And then just maintain your relationship with being good at burning fat, which means every now and then you go and kind of do a keto cleanse and make sure your body's still adapted. And that's it, and you can go in and out of it. You never lose the ability. Now, if you go on like a 6-week Ben & Jerry's binge, you'll lose it, and you'll have to go you have to go that whole 12 to 18 months of mitochondrial biogenesis to reap all the benefits again. But if you can learn to balance and excel at burning fat, which is your human birthright, if you have any right at all, it's to excel at burning fat. Okay, that's why it's here, is to burn. I hope you guys enjoyed that brief education. I probably should do Q&A outside, but I'll be around until tomorrow. I'm not in a rush to leave tomorrow. So anyone who has questions at any time, just let me know. Anyone who wants to argue and yell at me, fine. I'll be around. And thanks everyone for listening, okay?